Hello, welcome to Season 9 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. The theme of this season is 100 Years of Horror. We're going to watch two horror movies from every decade, from 1920 to 2020, in chronological order. We want to see where horror came from, how it's changed, and maybe even make some predictions about where it's going. If you want to see the full list of movies we'll be reviewing this season and follow along, then check out our website at thehorrific.com. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. You didn't tell me this one was a damn talkie.
Vampyr. Yeah, I know, man.
The industry.
It was a half-assed talkie.
You couldn't hear most of it, true, but still.
I watched it without subtitles just to add some, to do it in hard mode.
You were like, well, the story wasn't confusing enough, so how about we take out the dialogue too?
Exactly.
Yeah, this one was interesting. This was another one of those early German horror films, and I'm really starting to regret that we don't have better information around relative budgets for these movies, because I would bet that this one was lower, for example, than Bride of Frankenstein by a lot.
100%. It definitely seemed like the indie film of the 30s.
Yeah, and I feel like it would be a lot easier to cut more slack if we realized, just looking across some of these movies that we're doing, these old movies that we're doing, the ones that really were not only overcoming the technology limitations of the time, but also being made on, a much smaller budget. And it's interesting because, even if we had the numbers, that wouldn't really tell us anything because the scale was so different, then from now. But This was the first movie that we're doing from the 1930s. So this season we're doing two horror movies from each decade, from the 1920s to the 2020s. And we started off with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and...
If this is a test, I don't remember.
Nosferatu.
That's it.
The movie we weren't ever supposed to be able to see, according to the author's family. But yeah, so it's been an interesting journey, and we are now moving on to Vampyr, and I'm excited to get into it. Yeah,
I would think I have nothing to say. I shouldn't have said anything.
Then I will introduce it. You can do your fun facts, and then we will get into the blood-sucking details.
I love it.
In 1932, the German horror film Vampyr was unleashed on the world. This movie was written, directed, produced, and edited by Carl Theodor Dreyer. It tells the story of a man named Alan Gray who finds himself in the middle of a dark plot that involves an evil doctor and a blood-sucking undead old woman. Though this movie was originally released in Germany and later exported to a larger audience where it received mixed reviews, over time it stood up as a prime example of the creepy possibilities of the early horror genre. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
I'm just kind of impressed that we can actually find it.
I am too.
Yeah.
The fact that we could watch an actual distributed copy of Nosferatu still blows my mind.
Yeah.
The fact that we're watching movies that are 100 years old without having to leave the couch is mind-blowing to me, and I'm just happy to be alive.
Pretty awesome.
In this era.
Yeah. So this is the first film to receive an H certificate. So before, which, you probably won't remember being as young as you are, but they used to have different types of ratings for movies. I remember this specifically. And this was the first to get an H. Do you know what the H stood for?
Hell of a good time.
Close. Horrific. Film that was more than likely going to horrify children under the age of 16. Yeah. I was terrified when I first watched it in the 30s. Here's the last fact I have. So, a little difficult finding some stuff about this. Didn't try as hard as I should have probably, but one of the things that Carl preferred to do when making films was get non-professional actors. So you could kind of tell.
I believe it.
You could kind of tell. But I just thought it was kind of cool because it's like you kind of hear about, and I should have had an example, honestly, but you kind of hear about like the cool indie filmmaker is making this film, like for example, Blair Witch. Those were relatively unknown actors when it came out, and seemed a little bit believable because you didn't know who it was, and it was just kind of cool. Like, oh, they didn't originally get that idea.
Yeah,
that came before. I mean, they may not have known about it, but it also couldn't have been the first time that this happened. But he preferred to work with non-professional actors. Most of the actors
cheaper.
Probably, yeah, honestly. Most of the actors who appear in the film were amateurs that he met on the streets of Paris. That's slang for Paris. The only professional actors in the film were Sybil Schmitz and Maurice Schutz. Can't make that up.
Well, that's why he didn't have any budget left. Booking those two superstars.
Good God, you got Sybil and Maurice? You gotta be shitting me, man.
Broke the bank.
No. Schmitz and Schutz. That's all the facts I have for this film, though.
Well, all right then.
Yeah. You know what I thought was kind of interesting with this film, though? I want to kind of start this off. When you watched, well, I guess we watched the same one because I did Amazon as well. Did it say at the beginning, like, this was like put together from like film from German and France? Like they had to splice it together because they lost like the original footage?
If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were looking over my shoulder because that's actually the first thing I had in my notes to ask you.
Behind you.
So,
yeah.
Yes. The answer is yes. Nice. It did. And I thought that was really interesting because it said both the film and sound were lost over time for like the originals. So this had been like recreated from parts of the German and French ones that had been, from non-originals, but rather from like copies that had been distributed to other places. They just sort of took those and combined the best, the ones that had aged the best, I guess, or were still in the best shape to be able to put together an end-to-end movie.
So my thought, though, with this was, do we know that actually happened? No. Could this be the first, like, based on true stories?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Like this movie compiled from cameras found at the scene of
Right. It was so bad that we had to get rid of the footage.
Yeah.
Because it honestly, it did kind of work for me, like reading it. Like I was like, oh, this must have been pretty, gnarly for the 30s. Because every movie we ever watch that's old, they always say was banned in Germany. Well, yeah, everything was banned in Germany. It's like, yeah, of course. But when I saw that, I was like, oh, this could be good.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was interesting too, just kind of, trying to judge like the quality of a lot of things in the movie. And it's like, if we're not even watching the originals, if these were just the distributed copies, that who knows how well they were taken care of after traveling long distances, it's kind of hard to weigh in. But I did notice very early on that like the camera work just felt light years ahead of any of the movies that we watched from the 20s.
Right.
Like all of the panning and slow zooms and like a camera inside a house filming someone looking in the window and things like that. That's such a big departure from the camera just sits on a stand on the edge of the stage. It really was striking me in the beginning, and that I feel like this was sort of the first one that we watched, or the oldest one we watched, where they're really using that camera work to help create that feeling of kind of creepiness and danger. And it was cool. It was like watching, something happen for the first time. It was a cool feeling. And not to say this was the first movie that ever did that, but just in the horror movies that we've seen, this is kind of the oldest example. Yeah.
And one of the things I was actually reading about it was saying that this is right in that transition phase, like you were kind of saying with talkie films. And you could definitely tell based off of like the, without trying to sound stupid, just the way it was made. Like they added like the book in there that where you would read what was kind of going on, and then you kind of think, you forget that this is like a film that has people talking, and then all of a sudden someone would say a line, and you're like, oh, yeah, right, they do, they are talking, and then like with my ADD, I got really like sidetracked because it was like kind of thinking like, how did they, like one of the things I was reading was saying that they had, that the guy who directed this wanted to like figure out what it was like to record a film with sound. And so they tested with like flipping a book. Like he really wanted to test to try to drill down how to get the sound and make sure it kind of synced up, and just thinking about it, like you've never seen a film that had like talking, or you haven't ever made a film or seen a film that had talking in it before. So is there a delay when you say, like, you don't know how to figure that out? And it was just kind of amazing to me that they made a movie like this, his, first talkie film that also attacked a specific genre of, horror, which, that was pretty cool. It's just like, kind of reminded me of like the Evil Dead, just guys who are just doing this to do it, hopefully it turns out good, kind of low budget. If I don't know the budget, it just feels like a low budget. And it was just like, that's been around forever. Like I appreciate that when it comes to art,
Yeah, definitely. And sort of that just the discovery paired with creativity and what can come from it is interesting. It doesn't feel like we're coming in here knowing how to do everything. We're kind of making it up as we go along. And because we're not coming in, with everything feeling like it's already decided how we're going to do it, you can have that spontaneous creativity that comes along, which creates really kind of meaningful and unique things. And exactly like you were saying, one thing that caught my attention a lot in this one was the audio, because it felt like audio with no Foley, which is a thing I'm really not used to in movies. Because like you think about any TV show you watch, any movie you watch from like the last, probably 50 years, when somebody walks down a hallway, you hear every footstep. You know what I mean? When like somebody opens a door, you hear the door creak or whatever. There's just so much stuff that gets added in so that it like doesn't distract you that it's not there, but also kind of reinforces what's happening. To watch this one where a lot of times it didn't have that. I mean, like you were saying, there was long stretches where there was nothing but music, and there might be people moving or doing things that you knew would make noise, but you didn't hear it. And then sometimes it was like very deliberate, where they kind of worked it in like a knock on the door or something, but just the way that it would kind of go in and out was almost like disorienting in a way. And I don't think it would have had this impact on people at the time, with it being everybody being used to silent movies. But for us being used to all of that extra sound always being there, it was almost like with it not there, it just kind of set you on edge a little bit, which made it even creepier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny that you say that, because I don't think I noticed the lack of ambient sound that was going on, or like the walking and stuff like that, until you said it. And then as soon as you said it, it's like, that's exactly it. That's what was kind of making me feel a little weird while watching this. Yeah. Like I knew there was something, but I couldn't tell specifically what.
Yeah. But then again, I feel like not everything from the production standpoint, movie making standpoint, totally landed. It was really funny to me how Alan kept lighting candles, but it like didn't change the lighting in the room at all. And then it was also really obvious that the actors kept forgetting that they were supposed to be pretending to only be able to see by the candlelight. Yeah. And that was like throughout, like indoor scenes, outdoor scenes, it just kept happening. And once I noticed it, I couldn't not see it. And then it was really funny, which didn't, help with the tone of the scenes. But
right. Yeah, I definitely struggle with some humor with that, with the scenes too. I mean, even the scene that I put in here that's creepy was almost kind of comical at the same time. It's like why we're doing this is to try to like reset the palette for horror, and like understand where it comes from. And it's like, I can definitely see how this could be built up to be something terrifying, but I wondered everything I was reading, like, about the plot, because I'll be honest with you, I had trouble following what was going on.
Same.
Whole film.
Big time. Yeah.
And
this is, of all the ones we've watched so far, this is the one where I was just I have no idea what's happening or why.
Yeah, and then I would have to, like, read to see, what was kind of going on. It was a short film, but it seemed like it was, like, triple the amount, because it was just, like, yeah, but, anyway, I could see what's going, where it was kind of going, but what I kind of wondered is, I'm kind of obsessed with trying to figure out horror of these old age, like, just trying to figure out, like, how was this scary to them, and I know that we've been ruined by movies that have 3,000 gallons of blood in it, and all that. I get that, but a lot of the stuff that it was kind of mentioning was, like, supernatural, or, like, this person's from hell, or you'll go to, like, it was like,
sure,
it was like a more of a Christian thing, and, religion, obviously is a big part in the world, but specifically, I feel like back then it was maybe even a little bit stronger. I feel like, I feel like there wasn't as much questioning to it, and so you think, like, the added horror to this movie is the, going to hell part.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And it just, like, it kind of snapped, like, it kind of clicked, where I was like, I think that's what was kind of scary from them, or for them, and maybe the people who would walk out of film or faint or whatever, quoting that with my fingers, you guys can see, is like, oh, I wonder if they're just like, oh no, this movie's straight from hell, I'm not watching it anymore, I'm getting the hell out of here. I don't know, but it's just interesting to see that, they still make movies, with religious meanings and stuff like that, but I don't think that we find it nearly as scary as they would, because we understand where the film came from and that it's wrote by this guy, or, this gal, or whatever the case is. But that's why I think that's why I think that people think this one was scary throughout the ages.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like those subjects are a lot less taboo to talk about today, than they were at the time. And I feel like this one too did a lot of, sometimes it added to the scene, sometimes it, like, mattered, and then sometimes it was almost there just for, like, ambience, ambient creepiness, like that skull that kind of turns on its own, and this was one where I thought the sound usage was really creative for, like, this early on in movies with sound, where the old woman walks in and yells silence, and then everything goes completely quiet.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't have that effect in a silent movie, and like you said, this was like a guy figuring out how to do a movie with sound, and for that to make it in, it seems just so, like, creative to me.
Yeah.
And it grabbed your attention so much. But then there were things like the scene where that key on the inside of the door starts turning itself, and then the door just slowly opens. And granted, there ended up being a person on the other side, but just in that moment of watching that happen, that felt like I've seen this a million times before, but it still creeped me out while it was happening, which I feel like just means it's really well done and has stood the test of time. So for me, a lot of the stuff that stood out about this movie were kind of those, I guess, more like ambient creepy scenes, more so than, like, the overall plot.
Yeah. I think you're right on that. I mean, I thought it was kind of a cool concept of, like, how he showed, like, the shadow figures or ghosts or whatever they were. Like, I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, I know that with the Dr. Calamari, he really played on, like, shadows and stuff as well. Yeah. But it was just kind of cool to see how it kind of progressed, and may have had a stolen idea here or there, but he really used that as part of the storyline. Carl used that as part of the storyline, and it was like, oh, that actually kind of works out. Like, that's an interesting take. Now, there was also times where, like, it was showing shadows, like they were walking along, like, a ridge, and it was showing, like, the ground below, and I thought it'd be kind of cool if they just, like, move the camera up, and I don't know, like, if they had the camera up and, like, created, like, a fake background that kind of hid where people were walking to get that shadow effect or something. Just thought it'd be kind of interesting to try to make it, if you see it on the ground, it's like, yeah, someone's above you, dummy. Like, that's why there's shadows. Right. Like, I know how shadows works.
Yeah.
I'm not an idiot. But but I could see what he was trying to do, and I feel like it was accomplished pretty well.
Yeah.
It also reminded me of Peter Pan, though.
Oh yeah, a little bit. But yeah, and then there was like that scene where it was like the view from inside the coffin, and while the guy was like screwing the lid shut, and I really loved that. I thought that was such a creepy image and such a creepy way of pulling that off. Like it just, and to have the camera like inside the coffin while it was happening felt very just like light years ahead for me of like filming technique from anything we saw in the 1920s movies. So at this point, I kind of feel like movies were a little bit more established. The technology was probably a little bit better. The cameras were a little bit more portable. And now you see like with that advance in the technology and having seen, previous people make movies, you've now got people acting creatively on top of that. And so that was cool. And then I feel like it was the same thing when they started doing that weird superimposed effect of like Alan sitting on the bench. And then there are like the two images of him that are like leaning in different directions.
Yeah.
And then like one of them that's like partially transparent stands up and walks off. And then the other one is just kind of still stuck there. Still cannot explain any of what was happening in that scene, but that was such a cool visual effect. And it surprised me. I was not expecting that level of like special effect or like trick photography in a movie this old. And it really kind of pulled me back in at that moment to just like, what in the hell is happening?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it kind of makes sense now that you say that he wrote, directed, and edited the film. It seemed like he had a vision for it.
Yeah.
May have been a control freak, and he wanted to get it done. Hey, I support that. Now, the scene that I found that was kind of creepy, in a sense, was when Giselle, who was the girl they found outside, I guess, but she's in the bed. She's talking to a person, to another gal who's leaving. I think it was a gal. I don't know. She's talking to someone. She's in the bed, and she's just staring at him. It's like so long. Like she follows him from the left to the right, and she has this menacing look on her face. It's not like she's making an angry face. She's just kind of looking crazy at him, and it's like, oh, that's kind of creepy. And it's like long enough where it's like, oh shoot, that is kind of weird. Like if someone stared at me like that, I'd be super creeped out. And then right before they close the door to walk out of the room, she makes like a really menacing, like an actual angry looking face kind of. And then they close the door and it's like, what the hell was that about? Like what just happened? Yet again, don't know what's going on, but I'm really interested. Like that's super kind of creepy, but.
Are you talking about the part like shortly after she was attacked by the vampire
outside?
Yeah, and you're kind of thinking like, is she turning into it or whatever? But yeah, no, for sure that stood out and it was really creepy too.
It was like, what was the guy? I don't know. It's just kind of that scene was weird trying to figure out, but it's just that shot kind of sticks with me. That like her walking or her face just kind of moving as it goes. It's like, oh my gosh. Now. I didn't necessarily have too much beef with the music. They were doing with what they had, but there was one scene where Alan's like walking, and it's like kind of at the beginning when he's falling the shadows, and it's like really creepy, dark music that sounds kind of scary, and then like it cuts to like people playing, and it plays like a not circus sound, but like a really like a 30s like dance style like. Poppy
like
kind of
springtimey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then it goes right back to the creepy, and then it goes to that for a second. It's like, what? It's like,
I noticed that scene because it was like the contrast to the music. It was almost like if you had two speakers back to back, and one was playing creepy music, and one was playing like. Like you said, like 30s dance music, and it was just slowly rotating. Like it was such a weird effect.
It's like a carousel almost. Like shot. For sure.
But yeah, that stood out to me. Like it was too weird to not be deliberate.
Yeah,
I felt like, and I feel like that was most of this movie. I feel like that's the best summary of most of this movie. Is like I don't fully understand what's going on, but it is too strange to not be completely on purpose.
Yeah.
And so just from a create that weird feeling that horror movies go for, I think this was a pretty good example.
Yeah.
But a question I had for you. So overall story was like the doctor was in league with the vampire, and the vampire was sucking the blood of people in the area, and then he kidnapped a girl who was just like hanging on to her for the vampires or something.
Yeah.
And then when Alan ended up in the coffin, but then all of a sudden he wasn't, that was kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah, so if we're looking for answers, I don't know.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, because I got lost. I swear, I read the synopsis of this film twice today, and still,
yeah.
It's still like, wait a second, okay, because I'm also like, okay, the doctor's this guy, and we got Alan, Giselle, like, it's just like, trying to picture it, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I will say that was interesting from a story perspective on this one is, like you said, they had the pages of the book that were used a lot, and it was talking about vampires. And I thought it was interesting because this seemed more like a collection of myths and less like a synopsis of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yeah.
Like it did not, it felt like a pretty fresh take on the vampire mythology. And that caught my attention a little bit because I feel like so much of what we've seen has just been a rehash of Dracula.
Right. Even to today.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So to explain that scene, as Alan rests from his blood donation, a voice in the background is heard saying, "Come with me. We will be one soul, one body. Death is waiting." The manservant awakens Alan just in time for them to stop Leone from taking the poison left at her bedside by the doctor. Leone, if that's how you pronounce it, must not die till sunrise. The doctor escapes, but Alan follows. Alan's shadow separates from his body. He goes to the doctor's house where he finds his own body in a coffin. The body of Giselle tied to the bed. As Alan's shadow watches, the doctor and his wooden-legged helper nail shut the coffin.
They screwed it shut, but go on.
Well, yeah. Is it actually happening? Is it a memory or perhaps a dream induced by Alan's lack of blood? ? Now Alan watches the manservant digging up the grave as he goes over to help. Is it his own grave? Will he find his own body? They open the grave to find the old woman's body. As the morning sun rises, the manservant drives his stake through the old lady's body. Leona sits up in bed. "I feel strong," she says. "My soul is free." The man with the wooden leg falls down the stairs and is killed. The doctor becomes entrapped in blurred and green elevator. Alan unties Giselle and they go home together.
The end.
That's it. So that's that's their explanation of that, and there's not. Like that's
that's a summary of what happened, not
right.
Yeah. But it was also funny to me that a lot of the movie, like the barrier to defeating the vampire was reading.
Yeah. And
so like one of the last lines in my notes was, "The guy who could read kills the vampire."
Which could have been rare back then.
Like he found this book that tells him, a published book that tells him where to find and how to defeat the vampire terrorizing his hometown. What are the odds?
Well, it's also like, hey, why didn't the person who wrote the book just do it?
Well, that's a good question too.
Too many chiefs, not enough Indians, you know. I
heard that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I do.
Even managers need managers, right?
You're damn right. So, I think when it comes to this film, like it's like we got the in between of like kind of eras. So it's like they're kind of getting it figured out. You could definitely. I don't know this for sure. I just feel like it's an independent style of film that was done in the 30s. Could have just been a normal film done in the 30s. Not like I'm a connoisseur of the 30s film, but the problem with this what I've noticed just with this decade is it definitely feels like the indie, like you could kind of see the progression of film, I guess, as the decade goes. And you really kind of see the 20s kind of hanging on with this film.
Yeah,
the dialogue
I think that's a great point.
Silent.
Yes.
But I still give this an A+, but I give it an A+ more so on the fact that he tried and tried to do his own thing when people were making a whole bunch of different romantic style films. This guy's like, fuck that. I'm going to make a story that doesn't make sense, but I'm going to try. And, he did his best.
Yeah, I will say I am very interested to read the book that this was based on. Mm-hmm. And also, I think you were just very much on point when you said that this movie kind of still had one foot in the 20s, like in the silent film era. And to see something where it's like making that transition, like right on that edge, I think is super cool.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I have to kind of think about now, it's like, okay, well, they could really, I feel like they could probably bust out a movie in a year nowadays, shorter time if need be. We read a lot of facts like recorded in 27 days or 30 days or whatever, and then it's just editing and promoting at that point. Well, I don't know how long it took them to make films. This could have started, in the silent era and, wrapped up in where, they were able to get talk. I mean, well, I say that even though the fact was that it was his first talking film, but I don't know how long it took them to make films. It could have been 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, in the beginning I was talking about being curious to know more about like budgets and markets and, where did German filmmaking compare to American filmmaking of the same era? Like how much money did they get invested or have to work with versus, here? Mm-hmm. How easy was it to get a high quality camera there versus here, and stuff like that. So the economics of it and the economic opportunity of the filmmakers is something I would like to know more about, but probably not enough to do any research beyond just clicking around Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. And when I learn about things that way, I end up getting very distracted and usually not answering my original question. So I'm going to raise the question, but I make no promises that I'll ever answer.
Well, I will say this too, that I got to respect anyone that's making movies like this back in the times where, like the early film where, religion was a huge thing and you probably could get blacklisted if you cross lines with religion. So like these people who are doing this, I felt like they legit had to like the movies. They legit had to take the, I guess, swallow the pill of like, hey, I might be like barred from making film again. Might have to go over to Germany or France and make the film to get this done, because I could get, some really big prosecution happening. It was even in the 90s when Sinead O'Connor ripped the picture of the Pope up, she was like blackballed, and it's like, that's the 90s. This is...
Remember when the Dixie Chicks were talking bad about George Bush?
No, but I remember when I thought I was going to see Dixie Chicks and it ended up being the Dixie Dicks. That's a separate story for this whole thing.
I don't even know what that means, but I'm not going to Google it. But yeah, no, I think in general, like just social norms and sort of sensibilities were way, way, way more conservative.
Yeah.
And so to do a movie like this that was so far outside of the norm, I think really would have taken a lot of courage. And to be able to do that, to believe in the idea so much that you were willing to direct, write, produce, edit, hire no-name actors, like right. Whatever, to make it happen and to really pursue that creativity, I think is really cool. So, but one thing I did notice about this movie too, that still felt very much like some of those from the 20s, was how it just ended. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
because we watched the Vampyr, and we've also watched The Bride of Frankenstein, is that
we watched The Bride of Frankenstein next week.
We watched it next week. I guess I should say this next week, and I will, to make a point. But